Last week we covered the Dutiya Kamabhu Sutta, and a wonderful sutta which was a conversation between the lay person, Chitta, and Venerable Kamabhu. And he was asking questions on different topics which culminated on the attainment of the Sanya Vedaita Nirodha Samapatti, which is the cessation of perceptions and feelings. But he also asked a series of other questions. Today's discourse is a special one because it is also a question and answer type of a thing, but it is between a former husband and wife. The questioner, again, this time is a layperson. This time it's not Chitta, the householder, but it is Visakha, the householder, a businessman. Now, in Pali, in those days actually, at the time of Lord Buddha, men and women had pretty much the same, sometimes the same name. So you would see Visakha and Visakha. When it ended with an A, it was the female or version of that. So in this case, when we say Visakha, it is a male. Because we have also Visakha, some of you are familiar with, and she was the greatest benefactress, the greatest supporter of the Sasana, of Lord Buddha and the Sangha. She was so rich that the king had to borrow money from her. That's how powerful and wealthy she was. So she was the female counterpart of Anathapindika, whom you've heard about in so many suttas. He was the male benefactor. So in India, in the city of Shravasti or Savatthi, you have Anathapindika's monastery on one side, and on the eastern side of Savatthi you have Visakha's monastery. Because she didn't want to go back and forth, you know. She said, why don't I just build a monastery for the Lord Buddha here, close to my house? And voila, there was a monastery. So anyhow, this is not about her. I just mentioned her name because the name sounds familiar or similar. So this is about the questioner that I mentioned, Visakha. And the person who's being questioned is his former wife. A little bit of a background story. There was Visakha, who was a very wealthy businessman, and he had, just to kind of cut to the chase, he had gone to listen to Lord Buddha giving a Dhamma talk. That day, during the Dhamma talk, he attains to the state of anagami, non-returner. It happens. He was fully there. His heart was listening, not just his inside of between his ears, communication. There was no stories. Sati was there. And the right moment came and he became an anagami. Okay, it's evening, and now he goes home to his wife. He goes home to his wife, and she's respectful, obviously, her husband's here now, so she makes sure everything is fine for him, sets dinner, this and that. But there's something different about him. He's more serene, more quiet, more secluded even, pulled in. And they go to the bedroom, and he sits at the edge of the bed. She's waiting for him, and he gets up and he lies down on the ground. She looks around and she lies next to him, down on the ground. He gets up, goes back to bed. She's perplexed, she gets up and she joins him in bed. He gets up and goes back down to the floor. She's now really confused. She says, husband, have I done anything wrong? Why are you mad at me? Did I do something? And he says, oh, no, 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 no. She says, why are you avoiding me? Is there something I'm doing wrong? Have I done? And he says, absolutely not. And he says, I have something to tell you. And she says, what? And he says, something happened tonight during the talk that Lord Buddha gave. And I lost the desire for being a husband to his wife fully. So I cannot do the physical part of. And he says just straight away, I don't think we can live together as husband and wife. So she's shocked. And he says, however, if you like for us to live together, I think we can do that, but only as brother and sister. She says, very well. He says, however, if you like, if that's not acceptable to you, I totally understand, you're free to marry someone else. And she turns around and tells him, I cannot swallow the vomit that you spewed out. And he says, what do you mean? She says, if you are now more dedicated to the Dhamma, for a long time I've actually been wanting to become a bhikkhuni, to go forth. So if you are pulling away from sensuality and sexuality, thank you. I want to become a nun. And she asks him, do you have any objection to that? And he says, absolutely not. I rejoice in your decision. You're free. So she goes off and she becomes a nun. She becomes a bhikkhuni. After some time, he doesn't know this, she returns back to Rajagaha, where she wants to pay homage to Lord Buddha. And then he hears about her being back in Rajagaha. And he goes and finds her, and he starts to ask her a series of questions, because he's not an arahant. She is, because she became an arahant not long after that, because she had worked on it for some time in the past, and her aspirations were in the right place, and her dedication was impeccable. She became an arahant. So the commentators say that he was thinking that she might have lost her faith, that's why she left her training and came back to Rajagaha, without realizing that she had just come back to Rajagaha because she found out that Lord Buddha was there and she wanted to pay homage. And as an arahant, that's what many of them had done. They would go to pay homage to see Lord Buddha, and not to get validation, like the certificate, like I was joking about, a few times. You're an arahant, because if the person is an arahant, they will know they don't need anybody's confirmation. So she just wanted to share that joy with her teacher, Lord Buddha. So meanwhile, he's thinking maybe she lost her faith, so let me go and test her by asking her a bunch of questions on the Dhamma, to maybe hopefully get her to be, excited enough and dedicated back to go ahead and train some more. So, because he's not an arahant. So this is what's happening. This is the gist of the sutta. It's a beautiful sutta. And, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So this is from the Majjhima Nikaya, number 44, middle-length discourses. This is the Culavedalla Sutta. Chula means smaller, shorter, versus Mahavedalla. Mahavedalla, we have that as well, because if you have a Culavedalla, you must have a Maha. And the Mahavedalla Sutta is also in the Majjhima Nikaya, and that one is between Venerable Sariputta, who's being questioned, by another Arahant, Venerable Mahakotita, and who's also an Arahant. They're not testing each other, it's just Venerable Mahakotita bringing in his own students, his own bhikkhus, in the presence of Venerable Sariputta and his own bhikkhus, so that those bhikkhus could actually learn something from this interaction between the two Arahants. That's why there's so much compassion and love. Many people forget that. When they look at the Theravada tradition, they say, oh, you guys are so self-obsessed, you don't care, you don't have that bodhisattva thing that my Highness later on brought. It's replete, it's full. When you look at the suttas, it's full of compassion. It's overflowing. You see it in the example of Lord Buddha and every one of the Arya Savakas. These two Arahants. They don't need to worry about struggling. They just want to make sure, okay, how can we benefit our students? Okay, let's have this discussion where I can just pretend that I don't know and I ask Venerable Sariputta. So that's from the Mahavedalla Sutta. So this is the Culavedalla Sutta, the shorter, even though you're going to discover that it's not that short, although I'm going to try to go through it as fast as I can, given our time constraints. So, shorter discourse on a series of clarifications. Sometimes they're called questions and answers. So I like the term series of clarifications because you see Venerable Dhammadinna clarifying one point after another, one point after another. So Culavedalla Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 44. I have personally heard this. At one time, the Blessed One lived in the squirrel's sanctuary in the city of Rajagaha. Then Visakha, the lay disciple, approached the Bhikkhuni Dhammadinna, and after paying his respects, sat to one side and said, Personality, personality, it is said, Venerable Lady, what is it that the Blessed One speaks of while explaining this thing called personality? Sakaya, that sense of me, myself, my personhood. Friend Visakha, in explaining this thing called personality, what the Blessed One is speaking of are none other than the 5 grabbing aggregates. Pancha Upadana Khanda, the thing which makes us, me, that identity, which are, and she clarifies, you can tell that she's a very good teacher. She doesn't just give a short answer, it's like, okay, well, go deal with it, you find out. She said in brief, and now she needs to elaborate, which are the aggregate of material form, one keeps grabbing onto, that's the upadana part. Name and form, nama rupa. The aggregate of feelings one keeps grabbing onto, vedana. The aggregate of memories or mental associations one keeps grabbing onto, or perceptions. Oftentimes many people translate it as perceptions, sanya. The aggregate of habitual tendencies one keeps grabbing onto, sankhara. And the aggregate of consciousness one keeps grabbing onto, vijnana. In this way, the 5 grabbing aggregates are seen as none other than what is represented as personality, according to the teaching of the Blessed One. By saying sadhu, the lay disciple Visakha was joyfully delighted in hearing the explanation provided by the Bhikkhuni Dhammadinna, as he continued by asking a further question. it's interesting. I've always wondered about this. Like, I always try to put myself as a member of the audience, somebody who's sitting there in a corner as this discussion is going on, knowing the background story. They used to be a husband and wife. The protocol is completely different now. She's an arahant. I mean, you have to absorb that somehow. And he is like in hands in Anjali, on his knees, in her presence. He used to be her husband, her father-like person, you know, because when you marry someone, especially, I'm presuming, most probably he was much older than her. And now he's in Anjali and he's listening very carefully. He's in the presence of a teacher. And she's giving him some very serious Dhamma answers. So I'm always fascinated with that human element, the contextual elements, which bring it to life for us. They should. Because the suttas are full of life and relatedness. We can relate to these. So he continues. Source of personality. Source of personality, it is said. Venerable Lady, what is it that the Blessed One speaks of while explaining this thing called source of personality? Now when we say source, samudaya, we need to think of samudaya, that's the Pali term for it. Sometimes it's called the cause. So first, he's not, you know, somebody from the street. This isn't anagami you're talking about. They don't have sensual desires anymore, the lust and all that. They have cut all the 5 fetters, the lower fetters. So we're talking about the top 2 levels of the highest order of awakened individuals. So when he's asking these questions, first he's talking about sakkaya, that sense of selfhood, personality. And now he's talking about source of that, the cause of that. Do these ring a bell? Something and its cause? Ah, yes, 4 Noble Truths. So he is using the formula of the 4 Noble Truths, but interchanging it with sakkaya, personality. So instead of using dukkha, he's using sakkaya, which is the same thing, suffering. So the second logical question for him is, what is the cause of this? And that's what that's what every teacher should be asking you to understand. This thing that you're complaining about, this painful thing, okay, identify it first. It is this, okay? What is its source? We often forget to ask that. Earlier, if you noticed, that's why I asked you, what's going on? You said the thoughts, stories. Think of stories as what? Dukkha, sakkaya. The second question is, what is its source? No sati. If you keep the door open at night, rats are going to come in. It's not the rat's fault. It's your fault because you let the door open. There's no sati. Close the door. So, the second is the source of personality he's asking. And this is her answer. Friend Visakha, in explaining this thing called source of personality, what the Blessed One is speaking of is the very same craving that leads to rebirth in the future, along with the desire and lust that seeks to be delighted here and there. A little bit of this, you get bored, you go there. Not necessarily physically, but the mind is doing that all the time. You think about this, and then all of a sudden your story becomes bland, boring. And then the mind says, don't worry, I got the right story for you. What is that? That is Pono Bhavika. Pono Bhavika means the craving to become. Again, Again, a little bit of here, jumping over there. It's like wanting to travel. You've traveled here, there, oh, okay, don't worry. Oh, we'll figure out another place for us to go. Or you've tried all these sweets in this sweet shop. Okay, don't worry, we'll find another sweet shop so we can go and grab that. That's what people are doing. That's what advertisements are all about. Commercials are all about that. Oh, you don't like this dress? Don't worry, we'll find something else. That's what the mind is always doing. Craving, constantly. Along with the desire and lust, raga in Pali, raga, that seeks to be delighted here and there. In other words, it is the craving for more sensual pleasures, the craving for re-becoming, and the craving for no more being. No more being is also a type of craving. No, I just want to end this. Does that sound familiar? I want to end this, I'm done. What is that? You're still craving something. You're trying to crave another state of affairs than this. Get me out of here. Somebody who's in pain can write a book on that. They know how that feels. But in this Dhamma and discipline, in this Dhamma and Vinaya, that is also seen as craving. That is meant when explaining the source of personality, according to the teaching of the Blessed One. Because who is it that wants to no more become? A personality. I am this, and I no longer want this. For this. I, mine, myself. We don't like this, whatever it is. Now, if you're following the Four Noble Truth formula, you have an idea what the next question is going to be, right? I see a lot of nodding heads. The ending of personality, Nirodha. Venerable Lady, what is it that the Blessed One speaks of while explaining the ending of personality? Friend Visakha, in explaining the ending of personality, what the Blessed One is speaking of is the complete ending of that same craving mentioned, the dispassionate attitude, viraga, that allows passions to fade away. You're no longer passionate about it. You understand why is it that you want to no longer be. You understand the process, the pain. If you're really, let's say, burnt, like a burnt victim, somebody who's really, really first, second, especially third degree burns, pretty bad. What do? You just want to end, or if you have a severe, bad, painful toothache, just one tooth makes you get sick of life. If you've ever had that kind of a toothache and you have no way to take care of it, no dentist to be found, makes you want to think about ending your life. One time I was a kid, I was still like, this is before my major injury, foot explosion in Lebanon. This also happened in Lebanon a year earlier, when I was about 7. I'm laughing, it's not sadistic or, but just masochistic. But we were having dinner, it was dark, and the power would go out often, conserving of, power and all that, electricity. The whole city would be, no lights. So we would have, in the wintertime, we would have this small butane gas heater. And so that would be light source, and also candles, like a few, around the house. So there was something like this, like a sofa, and my grandmother was sitting there, and my siblings were there, 2 of them, and my mom was sitting here, and my dad was sitting here, and I was sitting on the other side. And my mother went and, so the tea finished, so she made new, batch of, the tea kettle, big one. And then she poured some, and then she said, make sure that it's right here. So she put it, there was carpeting, but then she had a padding, and then she put it right next to her on the ground. I finished. I got up, and I walked behind my dad, behind my mother, and I came down on this side, putting my right foot onto the ground, thinking it's going to land on the ground, but it just landed into the very hot kettle. My feet were so small that the tea kettle's, lid, as the force went on it, the tea kettle's lid came off and my foot went into the hot tea. I could still feel like the rush. At first it feels like very, very cold. Thing just went up straight to the top of my head, and then I felt the rush of heat. So anyhow, that took care of the rest of my, 3, 4, 5 months. I had to go to the fire department, and because they had to really work on allowing the dead skin, because it was really nasty burn. It was like 3rd degree burn. But during that time, it was so painful that I just didn't want to, sometimes I just didn't want to exist, because they had to really use tweezers, not to really gross you out, but to remove the dead skin to allow the new one to grow. They didn't have the technology, but it was very painful to remove the dead skin. So I know that's just, there's many, many worse examples, I'm sure, that many other people could come up with from personal experience. That was mine, and it was pretty bad. But whose foot was it, now that I think of it, after the fact? But we have many examples, each of us, where we have been in situations where we just want to exit, we just don't want to be there. But there's got to be a sense of identification. In other words, tanha, craving. Something precious is taken from us, or not being allowed to come into our lives. We need it. We know we need it. But somehow the conditions aren't there. It's painful. That's dukkha. Powerful dukkha. And here, the Venerable Dhammadinna, she's pointing out the ending of personality. What the Blessed One is speaking of is the complete ending of that same craving mentioned, the dispassionate attitude that allows passions to fade away. Another word for viraga is fading away. Not just passionlessness, but also fading away, allowing it to just be. Now I can talk even whimsically about that incident. Because it's going to go away. See, many of us think of anicca as something horrible, impermanence as something so bad. I have something wonderful that's happening to me, and you mean to say, Bhante, that life is going to come and strip that away from me? That's anicca. But it works the other way too. When you're having a very bad experience, even a long one, where you want something and you're being deprived of it, even that is impermanent, which is a good thing, right? That means the suffering is also impermanent. That's great. But we have a tendency of not looking at it that way. So impermanent is also wonderful, depending on how you use it. Even your suffering is temporary. The total and remainderless detachment and destruction of craving. When they say remainderless, she's talking about the level of arahantship. It is no more going to come back, remainderless. which is called the cessation of suffering. That, friend Visakha, is what is meant when explaining the ending of personality, according to the teaching of the Blessed One. Again, we're doing the formula of the Four Noble Truths, so now he's going to be asking about the path. The way of practicing that leads to the ending of personality. The way of practicing that leads to the ending of personality. See, he's asking twice. And we don't know if actually when they were having this dialogue, he did ask twice each of these things, but if he did, wonderful. If he didn't, the reciters of the suttas did us a big favor, because over centuries, sometimes if it's only said once, somebody might have made a mistake if it's only mentioned once. But if it's twice mentioned, you know that, oh, okay, so this is what they were saying. The odds are far less for it to be misunderstood, because they didn't have any writing for 500 years. It was just recitation of the sutta. So this is a wonderful mechanism for the repetition of the first question. It's the same thing. So the way of practicing that leads to the ending of personality, Venerable Lady, what is it that the Blessed One speaks of while explaining the way of practicing that leads to the ending of personality? Friend Visakha, in explaining the way of practicing that leads to the ending of personality, what the Blessed One is speaking of is none other than the Noble Eightfold Path, Four Noble Truths, which itself is the very way of practicing that brings about the ending of personality. That is, she's explaining it, right view, right intentions, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness of mind. Right, samadhi. Every single one of the links are stamped by sammaditthi. Sammaditthi does not happen just with the first of the Noble Eightfold Path, the first level, first stage. It must be present within every single one of those factors. That's what makes speech samma. That's what makes action samma. Samma, what is the samma? It's sammaditthi. It has to be present. That is why Lord Buddha placed it as the very first. If you get the view wrong, you get the rest of it wrong. You've heard me for many, many weeks and months, actually, here, really challenging the status quo of the world, the Buddhist world, the Buddhist way of the catechism or the teaching methodologies, the pedagogical current structures of what's going on in the world of Dhamma, what's being promulgated. You've seen me be sometimes quite openly critical, because I often am seeing a wrong view present and being promulgated as right view. Because others are doing it, so let's do it too. There's a deviation from the teachings of Lord Buddha. We have to bring it back, coax it back. That's been my attempt all this time. That's why the urgency, Samvega, has to be there for the practice. What is it that we're practicing? Is it right view to begin with? Let us just ask the question. Why am I going to listen to this teacher? Really? Last week I talked about the emotional sense of appeasement. It makes me feel good if I go and listen to this teacher. Okay, good. So what? Ultimately, are you walking away with something so tangible that you can put in your pocket, that you can apply during the week when it's really, really tough? Or are you treating that as like a hit, like a heroin addict does, every once in a while? So you have to go again and again and again. Well, you haven't learned anything then. Right view is missing. That's why so many people want to get attached to this teacher, this teaching, have several teachers, left and right, constantly, be involved in different programs. Why? Because they cannot face themselves. They're running away from themselves. That means they cannot stand on their 2 feet. There is no right view. So this is a responsible path. The Dhamma is a personal responsibility, that is. You must say to yourself, am I happy? And if you're not, you have to declare it to yourself. You know what? I'm not happy. Remember last week I said the Kalamas were really courageous people. They went to Lord Buddha and said, you know what, Gautama, we're confused. How many people can actually stand today and say, I'm confused, we're confused? How many people could do that? I don't know of any. Maybe a select handful. Because it takes tremendous sense of humility, courage, to say, and honesty to say, you know, this is not working. I have to be honest with myself. Something's wrong. Help me. I'm confused. And that's what they did. That's why they are on a totally different level, the Kalamas, than today, where we are. Because we are deceiving ourselves. We accumulate knowledge, and you know my position on knowledge that is undigested, right? It's poison. It's like undigested food. It's poison. Toxic. Take a little bit of the teachings Lord Buddha says in the Dhammapada and apply it. Right view, the Noble Eightfold Path, because I've seen people recite the Eightfold Path, just like they recite the Paticca Samuppada, recite. It's like a child reciting their ABCs. How is that going to help? Really? Let's be honest. So we have to be practical. Start with a smile. Yes. So, but, Venerable Lady, could it be that what often is termed as clinging or grabbing, upadana, is the same as the grabbing of the 5 aggregates? So he's asking, is upadana the same as pancha upadana khanda, which you, Venerable Dhammadinna, you just said the reason why there's a personality is because of the pancha upadana khanda, the 5 grabbing aggregates. So is this collection the same as upadana, such as we see in the Paticca Samuppada? He's not saying that, but she knows what he's saying. So he's asking, are they the same? Remember, we don't know for sure, but you can tell probably he's also kind of teasing her to see if she knows. Or is grabbing one thing and the grabbing of the 5 aggregates something entirely different? That is not so, friend Visakha, she says. For what often is termed as clinging or grabbing, upadana, is not the same as the grabbing of the 5 aggregates mentioned earlier, nor is grabbing one thing and the grabbing of the 5 aggregates something entirely different. So if you're the type of a thinker like Aristotelian way of thinking, you're like, wait a minute, what are you saying? This is like, you know, you're saying the opposite. It's like it's not, you need to hold your ground. You need to say, you know, it's either this or this. Friend Visakha, so she's continuing. The desire and lust for experiencing and holding on to the 5 aggregates are themselves the very same grabbing. So you must have the lust, the longing to have something, which has to do with grabbing, which is at the core of the Pancha Upadana Khanda. But, Venerable Lady, how does the view that one possesses a separate personality come about? Here, friend Visakha, the undisciplined, mediocre person. That's in Pali, we have one single word for that. Putujjana. You're laughing. Who does not have the ability to recognize the noble ones, while remaining unskilled and unwise as it relates to learning the Dhamma, also lacks the ability to recognize any superior persons. Nor is he skilled or wise as it relates to learning from the Dhamma that these superior persons teach. Furthermore, such an undisciplined, mediocre person looks upon form as if it were to have a separate selfhood, a personality, believing that whatever has a self must have its own separate form, or that whatever has form must also therefore have its own separate self. So, looking at something as separate. So, you look at form, using the body, material part of the body. One of the best examples is to play this game with yourself. During the day, I used to do this as a layman when I would be on the phone with some people, difficult conversations. Sometimes I would have to have a difficult session, even as a therapist, on the phone because the patient was unable to come to the clinic. So it's really pushing your buttons. You're really trying to help. They're really refusing. So meanwhile, you're trying to squeeze in some interventions, some tools that could be helpful. And sometimes it would go well, sometimes it wouldn't. But then anyhow, you have to end the call. And then you're easily caught in your world of worries, thoughts, concerns. Did I do enough? Did I not do enough? You know, am I a good therapist? I suck at this, or I shouldn't. Maybe I should leave, quit. All these thoughts, and then you look at your hand. Or sometimes I've mentioned to you, in having individual interviews, if you're not wearing socks, pull your chair back and look at your toes, wiggle them. Look at your toes. So you can do that, but look at them while you're doing that. It's very grounding. It settles you down. You're connecting back to the four great elements, dhatu. We forget that. Because most of the time we are objectifying it. This is my hand. What is a hand? It's just a conventional usage, a term that we all understand as this thing. Well, there's no hand, it's a body. Even there is no body as such, because it's just biochemical, metabolic reactions happening at this point in time under certain conditions. We don't like to say all those words, we just say body or hand. There's 28 different bones just in this portion of the body. 28. This little part. And I didn't even mention about the muscles, the fats, the ligaments, the tendons, the traffic of blood cells going in and out. My hand. So she's saying there isn't that identification with this as a separate thing. If there is, then she's saying there's upadana. Pancha upadana kanda. She's still responding to his question. She didn't just walk away from that. She's continuing, elaborating on her response. So she first covered namarupa, the form, rupa. Furthermore, such an undisciplined, such a putujjana looks upon feeling, vedana, as if it were to have a separate selfhood, a personality, believing that whatever has a self must have its own separate feeling. So I'm just going to abbreviate because she's going to say the same thing about the 5 khandas. Furthermore, such a putujjana looks upon memory. I like to translate sanya as memory or mental associations. they make more sense to me than just using the word sanya. Perception. It's too limiting for me, the word perception in English for sanya, because it changes. So they look upon memory or any mental association as if they have a separate selfhood, a personality. Further, such a putujana looks upon habitual tendencies, sankharas, as if they were to have a separate selfhood, a personality. This is who I am. This is how I think, okay? I am my habits. How many times do we say that? This is how I think, okay? Stop trying to change me. Ever heard of that? What is that? I am my own habits. Well, where'd you get those habits? You didn't buy them from the store. You've been developing them. You've been adding on to that. So they had been accumulated and are accumulating. They're not you. They're conditional. So when the person is taking this whole idea of selfhood objectively, really, they're forgetting that it is conditioned. And that's why Nibbana is the unconditioned. And that's where she's leading the conversation to. And that's where he wants her to be led, to lead him to. Furthermore, such a putujana looks upon consciousness as if it were to have a separate selfhood or personality. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, smelling consciousness, all these things, when they happen, they are so real, so crystallized, so thick, so material, that we think of them as the only thing that is real. When you see something shocking, it becomes your whole reality. When you hear a loud screeching or a sound or a scream or something very lovely, it arrests your attention. You become completely enslaved by it for that time. It becomes the only reality for you. That is what she's trying to say, as taking it as a separate, having a separate selfhood. That's when the person is becoming or using the pancha upadana, khanda, the 5 grabbing aggregates. The aggregates are not grabbing. We are the ones who are grabbing these attributes and saying, this is me, this is mine. That's how she's saying you can break the source of personality. This, friend Visakha, is how the view that one possesses a separate personality comes about. And how does, Venerable Lady, the view that one possesses a separate personality not come about? Here, friend Visakha, the disciplined, this is not the Putuja anymore, the disciplined noble disciple who possesses the ability to recognize the noble ones while remaining skilled and wise as it relates to learning the Dhamma, also has the ability to recognize superior persons, while he is skilled and wise as it relates to learning from the Dhamma that these superior persons teach. So she's from the start saying, well, if you want to have this end, we're then talking about a person who is a Sekha. Sekha is a noble disciple in training. An Arahant is an Asekha, someone beyond training. So a Sekha is a person who is able to recognize a holy one. They don't put a noble holy one, Sappurisa, or any of the 8 stages, the Sotapanna, or an Anagamin, or a Sakadagamin, on the same level as a Satguru or somebody. They will not come back and say, oh, Bhante, or this, this teacher says this, and they don't know how to differentiate. They put them on the same level. that is still a person who's a putujjana, who does not have the ability to recognize a person whose heart is drenched in the Dhamma and someone who is not. So she's saying, first of all, we need to be talking about a person who's a noble disciple. That's one. Second, so now she will present the opposite of what she said earlier. Meaning, furthermore, such a noble disciple, disciplined noble disciple, does not look upon form as if it were to have a separate selfhood. So she's saying, such a person does not look at form and give it a separate self-identity. When they look at the hand, they see it's just a hand. Meaning it has the 28 bones, the ligaments, the blood, the fat tissues, the tendons, and it is unstable. It is conditioned. It could suddenly develop rheumatoid arthritis. It could go like this. It could start hurting you. You could get it jammed inside a door. It's not going to follow your every little bit of, little command. You don't have control over it 100%. Okay, so it is conditioned. Okay, I see you. Material form. End of story. Moving on. So for such a person, it doesn't develop. Nor believes that whatever has a self must have its own separate form. Nor thinks that whatever has form must also therefore has its own separate self. So whether you're looking at something that has form, such a person will not give it or attribute to it a self difference. As human beings throughout cultures, we have given such credence and appreciation to poetry. They have a special status in human history. In high school, I used to read literature, and you would see a poet who describes a lake. In fact, one time I had to memorize a poem. I think it had 36 sections, each section had 6 lines, and I'm terrible at memorizing. And I think we were being tested on it, so I scored lousy. But the poet had spent so much time, I think 36 or 40, I forgot what you call them, like not quatrains, but it was, so it has sextets? Yeah, stanzas, yes. But each one of these stanzas, they're full of imagery, characterizations, anthropomorphication of this thing, which is in biological terms called abiotic, lifeless. We appreciate things that people give a self-identity to. But the Dhamma is turning that on its head. Years ago when I used to do animation, I was studying to become an animator, a different lifetime almost, and the instructor who was teaching us used to work with at Disney, and there were a group of men, they were called the 9 Old Men, and they were legendary. They were the ones who were responsible for every old classic, what was it, Cinderella and the Seven Dwarfs, all these, was it Cinderella? No, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, all these different animation classics, the 9 Old Men had worked on, and he was a baby. Like I'm a teenager when he started working with them. So he was in his late 70s when he was teaching us. He was so skilled of an animator, he would give him anything that is inanimate, a bottle, a pillow, a cushion, spectacles, a shirt, a cup. He would turn it into a character, and funny character. He would anthropomorphize them. That's what we do as people. We are excellent animators, although many of us might not be able to draw as he could, but we do this all the time. We do this with our ideas, with our thoughts. And that's why it's so foolish when you bring it up and you look at it with sati. Oh, okay. So with a seka, with a noble disciple, that's not going to happen. They will soon enough catch it before it develops into this idea of a self. So she'll continue with the other aggregates. Furthermore, such a disciplined noble disciple does not look upon feelings as if it were to have a separate self, personality. And she goes to next, with sanya. Next she goes to sankharas. And finally, furthermore, such a disciplined noble disciple does not look upon consciousness as if it were to have a separate selfhood, a personality. This, friend Visakha, is how the view that one possesses a separate personality does not come about. It takes effort. Many times people think that arahantship or awakening is just going to fall from the sky. It's not. It requires effort. You need to check the quality of your thoughts to begin with. But many of us want to have this attainment, which is completely false. We've probably gotten it from some other religion or thinking. Like, in Christianity there's revelation, or the monotheistic religions have that. It's got to be given by this higher power. There's no such thing in the Dhamma. You have to work for it. Sometimes more than others. But sometimes the work that you've done will show itself, will reveal itself. But you have to keep on doing the work. At least bring in sati. It's not going to happen. Your mind is not going to calm down. Your thoughts will not stop on their own. Okay? Give up that whole notion. You must apply. If you don't go to a job, do you anticipate getting a paycheck? A direct deposit without working from that job? Exactly, you have to show up. Okay, but when it comes to the Dhamma, somehow miraculously we're waiting. Okay, how come the attainments aren't happening? Okay, chop chop, let's go. I should have been a Sakadagami by now. Come on, what's going on, Dhamma? You have to work on it. But wisely. Wisely. And what, Venerable Lady, is the Noble Eightfold Path? Friend Visakha, it is none other than the Noble Eightfold Path delineated by the Blessed One. That is, right view, right intentions, right speech, right actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness of mind, samadhi. Of course, he knows that she knows what the Noble Eightfold Path is, but there's a reason why he's asking questions. They are almost like, in English we say, a lead-in. It's like a beginning, so there's a catch behind it. After the question, something is leading up to something. Venerable Lady, is the Noble Eightfold Path conditioned or not conditioned? He's testing her now. You can tell he's testing her. Friend Visakha, the Noble Eightfold Path is conditioned. The mind likes to put things in black and white. It's lazy, just like the body. Sometimes, because we think of the Noble Eightfold Path, because it's part of the Four Noble Truths, then it must be, because it takes us to Nibbana, so it must be unconditioned like Nibbana. Not so. Not so. Many of you drove to get here. drove a car or were in a car or a bus. Where's the car? Is the car here? No, it had to stop somewhere, maybe parked downstairs at the edge of the street. But it was used to get you here. That was conditioned. Think of it in those terms. Sometimes bringing images that are much more relatable to you really can drive the point home. Make it more understandable, the Dhamma. Friend Visakha, the Noble Eightfold Path is conditioned. Venerable Lady, are the three trainings, even that question was not there alone, you know, he's got something there at the end. Venerable Lady, are the three trainings included within the body of the Noble Eightfold Path? Or is the Noble Eightfold Path included within the three trainings? The three trainings, if you remember, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Many times we forget that they are very much part of the Noble Eightfold Path. In fact, you cannot have the Noble Eightfold Path if it doesn't have Sila, Samadhi, Panya. That's where Venerable Dhammadinna is going to beautifully clarify this right now. Friend Visakha, it is not that the three trainings are included within the Noble Eightfold Path, meaning they are not separately listed in the Noble Eightfold Path as Sila, as Samadhi, as Panya. But nevertheless, they're included in it. So don't expect to find them segmented, labeled, structured like that. But nevertheless, they go hand in hand. And she's going to go ahead and explain further. But the Noble Eightfold Path is certainly included within the three trainings. Thus, right speech, right action, and right livelihood come under the training in Sila. What a beautiful way of explaining it. Very clear, concrete. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Physical actions. Very concrete. You cannot think about Sila and say, I'm practicing Sila when you're still burglarizing or stealing office supplies from your office and expecting your children to teaching them Sila. Mommy, where did you get all those pencils? The office. My office. Yeah, but Mommy, did you ask the boss if it's okay? Well, it's in my office. It has my label on the door. I have the plaque and everything. Yeah, but Mommy, did you ask? Did she say it's okay? Johnny, stop asking Mommy that question. Action, livelihood. Sila is found in the Noble Eightfold Path. But she doesn't stop there. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness of mind come under the training in Samadhi. You have to have Sila in order for you to taste Samadhi, the fruits of Samadhi. That's why many of the 10-day retreats in the world that are going on, everybody's going. I'm always eager to see the personality changes happening in the person. And unfortunately, most of the time I am disappointed because there is no Sila being emphasized. Sadly, because the person is fighting, there is this psychosis, there is this schism happening within the person. Of course, exceptions are beautifully occurring here and there, where the person internally knows Sila must be there. So, whereas right view and right intentions come under the training in Panya. Remember, I constantly say how this path is based on wisdom, Panya. This Dhamma is based on wisdom. Last week we talked about the Kalamas. It's not oral tradition, it's not based on tradition as such. not just logic, not just speculation, intellectualizing. This path is not based on those things. They're part of it, but it's based on wisdom, experimentation, understanding. That's another word for panya. So what you cannot have those without right view. And your right intentions have to be there. Why do you come to a retreat? Why do you meditate? That also has to be addressed. Many people sit down to meditate because they want to experience relaxation. I tell people, you can go and get a hot shower and you can be relaxed. That's not meditation's purpose. It happens, side effect. So the intention has to be right. You have to be curious to develop into a sense of discovery, curiosity, development of your personality. That's why we're sitting ultimately. And what, Venerable Lady, is samadhi? Collectedness of mind. What are the sharpening tools for samadhi? What are the requirements for samadhi? What leads to the steady development in samadhi? See, so many aspects of samadhi. How can we sharpen samadhi? What are the requirements? The tools? And what makes us enhance, cultivate, and develop samadhi deeper and deeper? Friend Visakha, when the mind comes together and becomes collected, ekagata, it's in Pali, that is samadhi. She's answering each of his questions, by the way. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are the sharpening tools for samadhi. The 4 foundations of mindfulness. So earlier the question on my thoughts, the stories, this or and that are happening, and my suggestion there or direction was to point the mind to other areas of your life instead of compartmentalizing your meditation. Bringing your meditation into your life, into your kitchen, into your bathroom, into your job site. All these things means that you are practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness, meaning your body, kaya anupassana, vedana anupassana, feelings. You're with your chitta, you're watching the mind's fluctuations, the state of mind. And then Dhamma anupassana, different phenomena that occur, the relationships of phenomena. You're seeing anicca, you're seeing dukkha, you're seeing impermanence. You're seeing the 4 Noble Truths suddenly. That means you're constantly engaged. That is applying the Satipatthana. That's what she's saying. Instead of looking at meditation simply as a side gig, side job. It has to be the primary job. That's when your sati will not allow any thoughts to come in and out just like that. You're standing guard, you're alert. She's not done yet. The 4 right efforts are the requirements for samadhi. It's meaning the tools necessary. To constantly practice, develop oneself in, and be committed to these factors all lead to the steady development in samadhi. Constantly practicing. Any of these will actually connect you with the other aspects. That's why whenever you study the Dhamma, if you just hold on to one aspect of the teachings, you're holding on to every other aspect. That's why I've never encountered anything in all of the years that I've been studying different religions, philosophies, and things like that. Never have I come across something so thorough, so beautiful, so elegant. You hold one, you understand one aspect of the Dhamma, and you pretty much have understood the other aspects without knowing. It's mind-bogglingly beautiful, and only a Buddha can actually reveal that aspect of the Dhamma. So that's why we have to cherish it, we have to protect it through our lifestyle, the practice. Your life must reflect the practice. Venerable lady, how many are the sankharas? So now he switches gears. Remember last week we talked about in the Dutiya Kama Sutta, there was also some mention about sankhara. So now we're also going there, and you see how he's also going to talk about the cessation of perceptions and feelings again. Friend Visakha, the sankharas are 3 in number: bodily sankharas, verbal sankharas, and mental sankharas. Venerable lady, what are the bodily sankharas? What are verbal sankharas and what are mental sankharas? Remember, it's not like he doesn't know these things. He's inquiring, he's testing, and maybe you can also, I'm feeling this, maybe he is proud of her. I'm so proud of you. You have outdone me. Let me dig some more. Let me ask some more. Oh, I can't believe you know this? So there's that healthy pride, I would say. Not arrogance. Just the sense of satisfaction in knowing that she's gone deeper than him. Friend Visakha, the in-breaths and the out-breaths are the bodily sankharas. Thinking and pondering are verbal sankharas, while perceptions and feelings make up the mental sankharas. And how, Venerable Lady, are the in-breaths and the out-breaths considered to be bodily sankharas? So he's revealing, like, he's not stopping at one point. She gives him an answer, he's like probing her some more, trying to understand, what did you mean? How are thinking and pondering verbal sankharas, and how are perceptions and feelings mental sankharas? Friend Visakha, the in-breaths and the out-breaths have to do with the bodily processes, and thus in-breaths and out-breaths are bodily sankharas. As a biological organism, as an organism, you need to have some form of respiration, some type of give and take with your environment. To live, that means you need to be, in some form, breathing. In other words, to be an organism, to be living, you need to move. Move. Sometimes it's also called motility in some cases. Movement is necessary. What does a dead body not do? Well, it doesn't breathe, for one. It doesn't move. A thing doesn't move unless something is acted on it. Newtonian physics. I think it's the second Newtonian law. We need movement to be alive. In fact, any movement necessitates breathing. Even if you're holding your breath and you're trying to move, you're actually using the oxygen and the other gases that you inhaled, and their effect, their benefits that are still in your system, you're benefiting from those until it turns toxic and you need to expel those out of your and inhale new oxygen. In fact, Bhante Nyananda, I think I mentioned this before, he used to call sankharas preparations. He's the only one that I know who's used that definition for preparations. And I find them specifically apt and adequate, at least for the two sankharas, the kaya and the vachi, the bodily and the verbal. Why? Because we need to prepare, we need to brace ourselves. When you are taking a step, when you are being hit by something, when you need to open a difficult door, a handle, what do you do first? Right? What is that? You prepare the body. You infuse yourself with life force. So logical, so practical. Sometimes we think of sankhara so out there, you know, esoteric, mystical, some otherworldly, yeah, you know, 8th jhana, 9th jhana, business. No. Sankharas, bodily sankharas, breathing. Come down to earth, buddy. Here, right here. Stay here. The breath. And everybody has that sankhara, if you're alive. Friend Visakha, so she's now answering Vachi Sankhara, the verbal one. Before one breaks into speech, one engages in thinking and pondering. Therefore, thinking and pondering are verbal sankharas. It is sub-vocal speech, Bhante Nyanananda also would say. It's a preparation. Before you open up your lips, your mouth, and you unleash your words to the world, whatever kind of words, and oftentimes when there is no right view or when there is no sila, it is the bad kind of statements. It's coming from ignorance. You unleash it to the world. It doesn't happen just there. It's not an affair with your mouth or your tongue, you know. There was a preparation in the mind, the chit-chat going on in the brain, in the mind. That's why the real speech happens here. When we're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path, Samma Vaci, the right speech. What is that? Samma Vaci. The right speech with ourselves. What is the communication between my ears? That's where verbal sankharas are starting. Thinking and planning or pondering. I like the planning part more because the brain loves to problem solve. Well, I'll do this, and then do this. No, don't do that. It's like a mini schizophrenic inside the brain. In many ways, we are actually schizophrenics. We just don't come out and say it. It's too embarrassing. The real schizophrenics, they just stop caring. They just say whatever comes up. Otherwise, we're having this multiple personality disorder going on all the time in our head. We're fighting. And I see many nodding heads here. So, verbal sankharas are preparations. It's sub-vocal speech. And then the last phase of that is your lips moving. And the air comes in and you unleash hell. When there is no wisdom. But of course, in the case of a noble disciple, this is not, they're not talking about a Puja at this point. Remember, we're talking about an anagami and an arahant. So they're not going to be dwelling too much on the Puja level of explanation. And then she goes, perceptions and feelings are considered to be mental processes because they purely involve the mind. For they are things tied closely to the mind, therefore perceptions and feelings are mental sankharas. Venerable Lady, how is the cessation of perceptions and feelings attained? So now, about the cessation. Sanya Vedaita Nirodha Samapatti, which is the 9th jhana, you can think of it. So I noticed that the time is running pretty fast, so I'm going to speed the process a little bit. Friend Visakha, it does not occur in a way where the bhikkhu who attains to the cessation of perceptions and feelings would reflect to himself thus: I am about to attain the cessation of perceptions and feelings, or I am now attaining to the cessation of perceptions and feelings, nor I have just attained, I just walked into that state. It's not like that. And if you notice, it's exactly the same response that Venerable Kama, who gave last week to Venerable to Chitta, when he asked the same question, because the process is exactly the same. You are not mentally conscious when you are getting into the cessation of perceptions and feelings. You have prepared the mind before. The mind has prepared itself as it has moved through the jhanas, from the most basic levels, Rupa jhanas, to the Arupa jhanas. So it has refined itself. So you have made the determination at one point that today, as I go through the jhanas, I'm determining to go into the cessation of perceptions and feelings and stay in it for, let's say, 20 minutes or 2 hours. And remember, this is a state, and this is coming from a person who's nanagami, right? Visakha is nanagami. So he knows how to get in it, as she also knows. So she has the right to, and not every arahant can get in it, by the way. But because he's asking her this question, that means she's answering it, we know she can get into this state, which is very, lofty state to be able to, because not every arahant is. Rather, his mind has already been developed in such a manner that naturally it unfolds into and opens up to that state. It flows into that state. It's a natural process. If you've ever seen an avocado tree, or any tree, fruit tree, when it's fully ripe, the fruit drops on its own. It's ready. Boop. Just be there when you to catch it. Venerable Lady, as the bhikkhu is attaining to the cessation of perceptions and feelings, what ceases first? The bodily sankharas, the verbal sankharas, or the mental sankharas? Friend Visakha, as the bhikkhu is attaining to the cessation of perceptions and feelings, the verbal sankharas are the ones to cease first. Next, the bodily sankharas, and then finally the mental sankharas are the ones to cease last. So the first to stop, is the internal chit-chat. There is no more this. And on retreats, when you are encouraged to maintain noble silence, that is trying to induce that same level of silence in the mind, to make you become more comfortable with having silence in your mind, in your day-to-day life. When you're sitting on your bed in the middle of the night, or you woke up suddenly, check to see the mind if it's still noisy, if some thought is ricocheting left and right like a marble in an empty box. Or can you allow that to settle and just maintain noble silence? So that is the first thing that will stop completely before or as the person is going into the cessation of perceptions and feelings. And right after that, there is the bodily sankhara that shuts down. The breath becomes almost undetectable. There's no breath, as it were. You're not like, you won't see that process. And then finally, perceptions like memories won't come in. They won't be invading. You won't be responding to any feelings, even if someone comes and touches you at this point. Unlike the case would be, let's say, if you were in the fourth jhana. You would feel it if somebody comes and shakes you or touches you. It can pull you out of equanimity, upekkha. Not in this state. Friend Visakha, as the bhikkhu is attaining to this... I just read that. And how, Venerable Lady, does one emerge, come out from the cessation of perceptions and feelings? Friend Visakha, in coming out of the cessation of perceptions and feelings, it does not happen in a way where the bhikkhu would reflect to himself, I'm about to emerge from the cessation. So I'm in it, now I'm coming out. There is no such thing. Just like in the beginning when they when they flowed into that state, now they're coming out of that state because of their previous determination, Remember, the time is extremely important. You have to designate to the mind. You tell yourself, 31 minutes and 32 seconds. At 0.32 seconds, I'm coming out. The mind will come out of that state. But not when you're in it, you're determining, okay, I'm coming out. That's what she's saying. That never happens. It's impossible. Nor I have just emerged from the cessation of perceptions and feelings. Rather, his mind has already been developed in such a manner that it naturally emerges from that state. Venerable lady, as the bhikkhu is coming out of the cessation of perceptions and feelings, what arises first? The bodily sankharas, the verbal sankharas, or the mental sankharas? Friend Visakha, as the bhikkhu is emerging from the cessation of perceptions and feelings, the mental sankharas, perceptions and feelings, are the ones to arise first. Memories. Mental associations. This is before the mental chit-chat. Like, these are images. Suddenly, thoughts. Sometimes we have them. We all have them. Thoughts that come in out of the blue. So those are the first ones to come in. It's like those first shots in a movie, like especially black and white from 150 years ago. You know, when you see a strip of film and you have glimpses of the scratches on the screen, tip, 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 and then all of a sudden you see more coherent images. So think of them as that. Then the bodily sankharas come in, the breathing starts. And then finally the verbal sankharas, the noise starts showing up, chatter. That's the last to arise. Venerable lady, how many types of contact touch the bhikkhu who emerges from the cessation of perceptions and feelings? Friend Visakha, there are 3 types of contact that touch the bhikkhu who emerges from the cessation of perceptions and feelings. These are the perception of emptiness, the perception of the signless, and the perception of the undirected, which touch the bhikkhu who emerges from the cessation of perceptions and feelings. This is clearly different than any of the other jhanas, because you don't have to be an anagami or an arahant to experience any of the other 8 jhanas. And that's why a person who comes out of even the 8th jhana can be engaged in something else. Can look at something, and something that might not even look so sublime or be in any way noble. And they would just look. It was like, but naturally the mind inclines, gets to be touched, feels more natural, trying to establish contact with the signless. In Pali it's called animitta, signless. Because it's like almost like a bridge. Because here you are in the world of corporeality, the life that we have, objects, physical, you know. And then there was this state of cessation of feeling and perception. You cannot describe it, obviously. But there is a liaison, a bridge. And that bridge can be given these 3 characteristics. And we see this in several different suttas with the same responses given as to what touches, what is the contact that the bhikkhu's mind is touched by. Which touch the bhikkhu who emerged from the cessation. Venerable lady, in what direction does the mind of the bhikkhu incline and lean towards as he emerges from the cessation of perceptions and feelings? What do they look forward to? Friend Visakha, the mind of the bhikkhu who emerges from the cessation of perceptions and feelings naturally inclines towards seclusion. They're not going to run to the next party, the biggest, gathering. They're not going to text their friends, hey, I was in cessation of perception and feeling, let's hang out, I'm so bored. They're not going to do that. Let's have, I miss my friends. I don't know when was the last time. No, the opposite. in the Dhamma we have Chitta Viveka. Viveka is the seclusion. And for such a person, it's like so like appealing. It's like, it's, you know, imagine a child, the whole day was playing outside, exhausted, hungry now. Suddenly he hears or she hears mom's voice calling in from the kitchen, saying, "Come in, come in. Food's ready." That's how it sounds like. That's how it might feel like, the seclusion for such a person. So it says, naturally inclines. The mind of the bhikkhu who emerges from the cessation of perceptions, feelings, naturally inclines towards seclusion, leans towards seclusion, and slopes into seclusion. Venerable Lady, how many types of feelings are there? Now he's talking about feelings. This is something we didn't have last week. And she really digs into, gives beautiful examples, definitions. Friend Visakha, there are these three types of feelings: pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neutral feelings. And what, Venerable Lady, is a pleasant feeling? What is a painful feeling? What is a neutral feeling? Friend Visakha, whatever agreeable or enjoyable feeling that is experienced, whether through the body or mind, so we're talking about two different types of feelings, both the physical, bodily, and mental, because oftentimes we forget the mental feeling. Last week I mentioned about the sensual aspect of thoughts. We forget how important thoughts are. Ideas. We lean towards concepts. We worship concepts because they make us feel a certain way. Ideas. Whatever disagreeable or unpleasant feeling that is experienced, whether through the body or mind, is a painful feeling. Whatever is experienced through the body or mind that is neither disagreeable or agreeable is a neutral feeling. Venerable Lady, what is it that is pleasant and what is it that is painful within what we call a pleasant feeling? Same thing for painful feeling, and same thing for neutral. I'm trying to abbreviate because there's repetitions. Friend Visakha, pleasant feeling is pleasant when it lingers, but becomes painful when it vanishes. If you ever pet a cat, or if you've ever had a massage, or you've ever enjoyed something lovely, and suddenly, without you asking for it, it stops. Why'd you stop? Where are you going? Come over here. Like, why? Something so lovely became not so lovely. It became painful. That is the pendulum that we are caught in all the time. Painful feeling is painful when it lingers. It's the opposite. But becomes pleasant when it vanishes. Oh, thank God, he shut up. Finally. You know, like some professors or some speakers. Neutral feeling is pleasant when one knows and sees it as such. This is important. This is more important than the other first two. But becomes painful when one is lost in ignorance and is neither able to know nor see it as such as a neutral feeling. The majority of the time, the feeling that we all have is a neutral feeling. It's not always painful. It's not always pleasurable or pleasant. The biggest chunk of feelings we have are neutral. Unfortunately, we also define it as boring, meaning we exit the scene, meaning we are not mindful, meaning we are ignorant of it. Lord Buddha emphasized neutral feelings so that we infuse it with wisdom. In other words, sati. See, if the mind is not bored, it's not going to think about concepts, stories. It's bored. That's why it wants to come up with ideas after ideas, papanchas after papanchas, because it is ignorant. That's why it's dangerous. Venerable lady, what is the underlying latent tendency, that is anusaya in Pali, responsible for pleasant feelings? What is the underlying latent tendency responsible for painful feelings, and similarly for neutral feelings? Friend Visakha, the underlying latent tendency responsible for pleasant feelings is lust, raga. The underlying latent tendency responsible for painful feelings is aversion, patigha, sometimes called repulsion. And the underlying latent tendency responsible for neutral feelings is ignorance. Remember, Paticca Samuppada. First link is ignorance. Maybe there's something to this ignorance bit, isn't there? We often forget the role of ignorance, but it's the ground upon which dukkha lives. Always check if there's dukkha being experienced. Check underneath dukkha. What is dukkha resting upon? Right now your feet are resting upon the ground. Right? Ultimately, or is it on the mat? Well, the mat becomes the ignorance. Use these games with yourself to look for the Dhamma in your daily life. It's nowhere else. It's not in books. No, it's in your life. In that case, Venerable Lady, is the underlying latent tendency for lust responsible for all kinds of pleasant feelings? This is almost like a trick question. So you mean to say that the anusaya of raga, latent tendency of lust, underlies all pleasant feelings? Similarly, is it the same for aversion and the same for neutral feelings? No, they are not, friend Visakha. The underlying latent tendency for lust is not responsible for all kinds of pleasant feelings. Same thing with the aversion, and painful feelings, and ignorance with neutral feelings. Venerable Lady, what is it that must be expelled from pleasant feelings? Expel, I use the word expelled instead of abandoned. For me, expelled gives the image of an active role that the person has to play. Much stronger to me than abandoning, relinquishing, which is kind of almost like passive. It doesn't involve too much from the person, a role, an active role. So I've chosen in this translation that I did, expelling. What is it that must be expelled from painful feelings, and the same thing for neutral feelings? Friend Visakha, from pleasant feelings, it is the underlying tendency to lust that should be expelled. From painful feelings, aversion that must be expelled. And from neutral feelings, ignorance. Venerable Lady, should the underlying tendency to lust be expelled from all pleasant feelings? So now he's asking the same question he was asking earlier with a different twist. Similarly for painful and neutral feelings. No, friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust need not be expelled from all pleasant feelings. Similarly, the underlying tendency to aversion need not be expelled, and similarly with the neutral. And now she's going to explain as to why, what she means by that. Here, friend Visakha, the bhikkhu being secluded from sensual desires and unwholesome thoughts enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by thinking and pondering, with joy and pleasure that arise from such seclusion. Having experienced this, he relinquishes whatever lust may have been there in the past, and therefore the underlying tendency to lust no longer becomes relevant. We have to seclude ourselves from sensuality, the desire to experience sensual pleasures, in order for us to enter even the first jhana. So the person has to relinquish, expel the desire to experience, I want to experience joy. So, in a way, the person is knowingly engaging in a kind of effort of opening up, allowing the mind to settle more and more and more. With that sense of relinquishing or relinquishment, suddenly they discover a new vista of grander possibilities for the mind. Suddenly, there's this deep, deep state of relaxation that is extremely joyful. Every millicentimeter or millimeter of your body gets to be infused with the joy. It's like goosebumps, goose flesh everywhere, including behind your ear. Every single hair follicle starts glowing. There's not a place in your body that doesn't vibrate with the joy. That's nice. But the person is not like, yeah, let's. They're not. They're dropping that raga, that lusting after it. So that's why she's saying it's not underlying that state. And she's using the example of the first jhana. So it's not the basis. The anusaya for raga is not the basis for such a person to experience the joy that the first jhana presents. Then, friends Visakha, the bhikkhu reflects thus: oh, when will I finally enter upon and abide in that sphere that the noble ones enter upon and abide in, right here and now? When will I experience that, the state of the deathless, that longing? Thus, for the person in whom such a desire is aroused for the incomparable release, nibbana, sadness arises as a result of that very longing that is in the heart, in not having yet experienced it. In realizing this, one expels the aversion, because now you start hating the fact that you're not there yet. You're in pain. Some people become so depressed. You have examples of students who've gone really close to committing suicide at the time of Lord Buddha, because they were not experiencing arahantship, because their whole life was revolving around it, but they still could not. Some came really close and some actually committed suicide. And that's why there is this term called, in the suttas, using the knife blamelessly or with blame. With blame is someone who has a lot of fetters, a lot of anusayas. So they're coming from a state of longing. So they've been dominated by that anusaya, versus someone else who doesn't. And they've already done a lot of work, and they're at least anagami. So, thus, for the person in whom such a desire is aroused, for the incomparable sadness arises, so they realize that there is aversion and they expel it. This is adhamma, and thereby the underlying tendency to aversion no longer becomes relevant. They feel the sadness. They know the sadness that I'm not there yet. But they also realize that was generating aversion in them, that they're not there yet, and they stop fighting it. They start seeing it because they have right view. Remember, the Noble Eightfold Path is still playing here. They haven't forgotten it, threw it away. Then, friend Visakha, by giving up both the pleasure and pain, excuse me, and having already gone beyond joy and anguish, the bhikkhu abides in a state of purifying mindfulness with an ever-present sense of equanimity, the fourth jhana. While experiencing neither pleasure nor pain, having now gone beyond them, he attains to the fourth jhana. Having experienced this, he relinquishes whatever ignorance may have been there in the past, and therefore the underlying tendency to ignorance no longer becomes relevant. The word ignorance is used here because many times people think of upekkha, because upekkha is neither pleasure nor pain. It's balanced, it's equanimity. So here she's using that word to signify this. She's pointing out that this is different. Upekkha is different. Because the person has strong sati and strong upekkha. It's different than having boredom. The person is fully there. They're in an equanimous state. Hence, they are in the fourth jhana. Venerable Lady, what is considered to be the counterpart of pleasant feelings? What's the opposite? Friend Visakha, the counterpart of pleasant feelings are painful feelings. Venerable Lady, what is considered to be the counterpart of painful feelings? The counterpart of painful feelings are pleasant feelings. Back and forth. What is considered to be the counterpart of neutral feelings? The counterpart of neutral feelings is ignorance. Because neutral feelings can be upekkha based. But the counterpart of that is ignorance. That's what she's clarifying here for him. What is considered to be the counterpart of ignorance? So you're going to see how it's kind of escalating, the intensity of the questions, and where this is going to lead. It's going to go somewhere. What is considered to be counterpart of ignorance? The counterpart of ignorance is true understanding. And that's what upekkha is leading a person to. Upekkha, if you think about the bojjhangas that I've covered with you during the 3-day retreat, the upekkha in the bojjhanga or sambojjhanga formula includes within it panya. Also, because in the bojjhangas you don't have panya as such, if you notice. Like the pancha indriyas, it's not like that. In the bojjhangas, upekkha stands. You cannot get to upekkha without panya. That's what she's pointing at. What is considered to be, so true understanding. What is considered to be the counterpart of true understanding? The counterpart of true understanding is release. What is considered to be the counterpart of release? The counterpart of release is nibbana. What is considered to be the counterpart of nibbana? Friend Visakha, your questions have gone far beyond their boundary, seeing that it is not possible for you to grasp the limits of your questions. She just set herself apart from him. It's like, you've reached your limits. Oh, you anagami. She's an arahant. She just said that without saying those words. Seeing that it is not possible for you to grasp the limits of your question. Friend Visakha, but she's not mean, or there isn't an iota of that arrogance in her. Of course, she's an arahant. But look at her compassion, because now she needs to explain to him something else. Friend Visakha, the holy life merges in Nibbana. So now she's giving it in baby, morsels. Because he's not there to experience arahantship or the arahatta phala. She's now going to use words to help him intellectually comprehend what she's trying to say, or the experience is like. Friend Visakha, the holy life merges in Nibbana, for Nibbana is its ultimate aim, its end goal. Now, if you like, you may go ahead and approach the Blessed One and inquire further about this. And as the Blessed One explains it, so you must hold it close to your heart and remember it. Then the lay disciple Visakha, being delighted in hearing the words of the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, got up from his seat, and after paying his respects to her, and having circumambulated the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina by keeping her to his right, he left to see the Blessed One. Once having approached the Blessed One, the householder Visakha paid homage to him, and then sat to one side and related the conversation that had taken place earlier between himself and the bhikkhuni Dhammadinna. Once Visakha finished speaking, the Blessed One said, Visakha, the bhikkhuni Dhammadinna is very wise. For if you had posed these questions to me, I too would have given you the same exact answers. So, bear these explanations in your heart as the bhikkhuni Dhammadinna has explained them, and remember them. This is what the Blessed One said, and the lay disciple Visakha was delighted in the Blessed One's words. Sadhu, sadhu. I love this sutta. It's just beautiful. It's refreshing. It's delightful. It's light. It's so human. Inspiring would be another word. So it's time for you to ask questions if you have them.
I just want to get more clarity on verbal sankharas versus mental sankhara, because verbal sankhara is like you said, internal chit-chat, right? Internal chatter, mental chatter. Mental sankhara is also mental, but more perception and feelings. So I need clarity.
The way we define in our head
Right.
the terms to make them more palatable is very important. So how we formulate the question, like in this case, when you said verbal sankharas are also mental, Bhante, and the mental sankharas are also mental. That's where the clarification correction has to be done rather. The reason why Lord Buddha placed them in 3 different categories is simply because and called them vachi sankhara, verbal sankharas. Don't be confused by the fact that these are internal dialogues. Because they are internal, then they have to be mental. I wouldn't necessarily categorize it like that. What I recommend to make it a little bit more understandable, relatable, is to think of vachi sankhara as sub-vocal speech. Internal speech, but it's so inaudible you cannot hear it yet until you open your mouth. You give it air and you push through time and space. And then it becomes actual speech that people can hear, including yourself, loudly. And that is vachi sankhara. So instead of saying mental speech, okay? Because it's more than that. And another thing, with vachi sankhara or verbal sankharas, you need to be actively participating in them. Versus, this is also clarifying the 2, by the way. The 2 meaning the mano sankhara. Thoughts or memories, when they get sparked, usually for the mind of a patujjana, it's not being done actively. You meet something, you see something, you hear something, you touch something, suddenly there's a memory that is instigated. You didn't actively go looking for it. Okay? If you do, then we're dealing with papanchas. You're weaving a story. Right? That's different. The same thing with feeling. Because you've had the perception, you have the memory, you saw an image. You didn't go looking for it, you just saw an image. That gives you a direct experience. Earlier I gave the image of a child playing and they're exhausted at the end of the day and mom is calling from the kitchen. That generates also a sense of some type of a feeling. Perception, feeling, they go hand in hand. That's why they are called mano sankhara. Now, they happen constantly in the mind of a putujana. That's why sooner or later you find yourself in the land of papanchas. The stories you mentioned earlier, right? You're lost in those circles. You're gone. You're in the fairy tale land of your own mental conjurings. And it's like Alice in Wonderland. You're going down the rabbit hole. It never stops. Until there's sati. Boom, you wake up. Now in the mind of an arahant, or even an anagami, it doesn't happen like you're on a freeway, where all of these things are happening in wholesale, coming at you. Things happen more in a singular fashion. That's why there's a distinction in the suttas. Mano sankhara versus chitta sankhara. Sankhara in the form of a singular versus the plural, sankhara or sankhara, without the elongated a. There's a different categorization, not to complicate things for you, but there's this, when a person becomes an arahant, especially, they no longer are generating sankhara, they're not victims to it. Of course their mind is there, they process information, but they are living one moment to the next. It's called kiriya chitta in the commentaries. Kiriya chitta means they're always fresh in a sense. It's action being committed, but it lacks the necessary ingredients to turn into karma. There's no craving.
There's also no retention, right? I mean, as it happens, that's it. As it happens, that's
Yeah,
it. There's no retention.
No, when you say no retention, it means like the person is a vegetable, or they have a very short, very short term, like amnesiac. There's a term for it, like 5 seconds, they forget. That's no retention, the way I understand it.
Okay.
But that's not it, because obviously the arahant will remember. Venerable Dhammadinna knew who Visakha is.
Okay.
But they don't dwell on it, yes. They don't dwell on it. Somebody comes and steps on her toe, she doesn't hold a grudge. Oh, you, I know you. She won't. Maybe she won't expose herself to a possibility for them to harm her again, or step into some damaging thing. So she has very alert mind, but she's not holding on to anything. So chitta is chitta sankhara, that happens for an arahant especially, but also anagami has an idea of what that is, because there's sati. Earlier I was saying, sati is not something that you need to do and then forget about it. It will take you straight to nibbana. You'll become like Venerable Dhammadinna. She doesn't have stories running in her head. Okay? Any other thoughts, questions? What was there?
I got one more question.
Okay.
You explained a bit.
Be well.
You explained a little bit just now between neutral and a mind with equanimity. So neutral is is actually an ignorant mind, a bored mind, right? Bored. But it's looking to do more, probably construct more stories. Neutral. And then equanimity, is it something like you said, true understanding, release, and nibbana? I always have a bit of confusion between equanimity and neutral, because both are supposedly a mind without much things going on, right? Yeah.
There's a lot happening in the mind that is equanimous, but you have to be in that state to know it. A person who's very intellectual likes to have all the answers intellectually. It's like going somewhere, you need to read about it, understand it, and it's almost like being there, but you've never been there. It's not like that either. So it's practice-based, ultimately. Pachattam vedita bhovinyuhi. It has to be realized by the wise for themselves, by themselves. So equanimity has a lot. For a person who's never experienced equanimity, yes, they're going to say, yeah, it's the same as neutral. Yeah, from the outside, when you look at equanimous state of mind, yeah, it is neutral. But is it the same as being neutral? No. I can't tell you more. I can encourage you to get into that state. Starting from the first jhana. It's there, but it's not as pronounced. As you go deeper into the jhana, especially when it comes into its culminated form in the fourth jhana. That's why pleasure and pain no longer matter. The mind has reached a state of maturity where it's no longer moved by this, either one. Now, the neutral part, of course, when you're doing sati, and this is where wisdom is key, it's not a matter of you seeing the three characteristics of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, intellectually. No, when you're practicing sati, you will see how in one moment you are at one end of the pendulum. You're completely mesmerized by something so pleasurable. But 5 seconds later, the conditions change. And now you're on the opposite side of the pendulum. So enough of this in the presence of sati will get you to have the knife touching the bone that I was saying earlier. You get tired of it. You say, why is this happening? And then you look and you see anicca. Now you start seeing in a very experiential, existential way that the wisest thing to do is look at it with maturity and see the neutrality of it. It's no longer pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain, pleasure and pain. It's foolish, it's childish. That's why it's a mature path. But it's not just that. There's also the jhanas that will validate for you on such a deep level, and suddenly as you're practicing you will taste it in a different way, in a more deeper, visceral level that stays with you forever, which makes you even more curious to go deeper than the fourth jhana. But you don't even have to go through the jhana path. You can also apply it simply through the path of wisdom by understanding the pendulum action. And the essence for both, the key, the ladder, the access code for both is sati. You cannot leave sati at home and go to work. It's impossible for you to taste any of this. In fact, you will write my explanations down. By the time you flip the page, you've already forgotten about them, unless there's sati. It has to be application-based. This Dhamma is applicable, Lord Buddha says. So don't keep it as something separate from your life. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you, Bhante.
Any other thoughts, questions? If there are no questions, we can just do the transfer of merit. Yes? Okay. Akasatha chabumata devanaga mahindika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasasanam. Akasatha chabumata devanaga mahindika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu desanam. Akasatha chabumata devanaga mahindika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakhantu mam paranti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.